It's a hot one out here. We're supposed to do 115 today, and we just had a thunderstorm. But that's how it is out here in the high desert. This is a LT 5.3. This has our prototype V5 module in it. We have it under the hood, and we're testing it in these high temps. Air conditioning's on in this Jeep. Let's take a look at it. All right, first, this 5.3 has an LT1 intake, as you can tell. Look how much room we got here. That's really hot. I would say the underneath of this hood with the AC on and this fan going is over 250 degrees. So imagine your oven on a low setting. Here's the V5. It's just sitting in this cardboard box. Eventually it'll be potted with epoxy in an aluminum finned case or box like this ECM here. But this 5.3 has done fantastic. We just got back from Utah, and we averaged almost 18 miles to the gallon in this Jeep at 80 miles an hour. And we went through thunderstorms, windstorms, rainstorms, and now here we are out in the desert with triple digits. So we're gonna take this Jeep back to the shop. Check this out, guys. We're in the middle of the desert with a early JK with a 5.3 LT in it. It was 115 degrees out, and then we ran into this rainstorm or thunderstorm. We got thunder and lightning going on, and the temps have just dropped down into the 80s. This is actually a combination that I've been wanting to drive, because usually when we put LTs and stuff, it's got 40s, it's got stuff hanging off of it, a lot of drag, 1-ton axles. So to be able to drive something that's halfway normal, and as you can see, there's so much water on the road, we can't see the lines, or lanes. So I wanted to drive something that was a little bit more ordinary. So the trip to Utah was pretty uneventful, other than the windstorm and the rainstorm and the thunderstorm we went through. We're up here in the beautiful Provo Pass. I do want to say that this Jeep does have something a little new, and that is our V5 controller. Now the V5 controller is the same controller as the V3. The V3 has been around since 2016. We've made well over 1,000 of them, maybe 2,000 at this point. But the V5 is essentially a V3 that we've shrunk a little bit and beefed it up so that we can run it in the engine compartment. Why do we want to run it in the engine compartment? Well, it just makes things more simple. That means there's less wires to run into the cab. So it's pretty small. It's about the size of a small cigarette box, and it's just going to sit in line with the harness. And that way we don't got to run power and ground and a bunch of other wires to it from the engine compartment into the footwell. Now, as far as the performance goes, there's really no difference. So we've been testing these for the last few weeks, and we're going to continue to test them. Now, again, you're not going to really get any benefit or advantage of the V5 over the V3. It's just a little bit smaller and designed to go into the engine compartment. So you're probably going to see those coming out in the near future, but if you got a V3, there is no reason to upgrade. You're not going to gain anything. We are driving through the Utah countryside at about 80 miles an hour, and I'm going to give you my reasons why I think the LT 5.3 is the new standard in JK powertrains, and for that matter JL and JT. I have one of these in my own JL. We all know that when you pimp a Jeep out with 40s and armor and all that, the V6s don't hack it. You put a supercharger on it, and the drivability, the sound, the longevity just isn't there. It's not the same as a V8. A V8 makes the JK run like it should. I think Chrysler's mistake was, for all the years they made the Wrangler and the CJ and the TJ and the YJ, they were really considered off-road vehicles. And that's really what they were. They weren't made for comfort, they weren't made for speed. But when they came out with the JK and they made it into a four-door, it became a family SUV as well as an off-road vehicle. So guys are going to drive these things on the highway. They're going to load them down like they would their Tahoe or their Expedition or whatever SUV you drive, and they expect it to perform on the highway. Speeds today are not what they used to be. As you can see, I'm cruising at 80 miles an hour in this little LT 5.3, and it has no problem holding these speeds, even in the mountains, and we're at pretty high altitude right now. So the V6 pretty much gave it up when you had a heavy JK with a lot of drag at high altitude going at high speed. Now the V6 wasn't so bad off-road, but you had to get to off-road. And Chrysler always kind of considered the Wrangler as an off-road vehicle where the engine was enough to get you to the off-road trail, and that was about it. So immediately after the Wrangler JK came out, everybody started working on power adders, the supercharger guys, the Hemi guys, the GM guys like me. And by 2008, there was a lot of options out there. 2008 is when Motec first started working on the LS conversion. And we got to talk about the LS in order to understand the LT. Right around when the Wrangler JK was released in 2007 is when the Gen 4 LS engines from GM were becoming popular. The Gen 4 LS engine took the Gen 3 LS engine to the next step. And the Gen 3 LS made a huge step from the small block. So the Gen 4 added variable valve timing, but more importantly, it added the 6-speed transmission. The 6L80 was really a great transmission, and it's still a great transmission. And the Gen 4 engine used that transmission for a lot of years. We all know the LS3 dominated anything in engine performance for years, whether it was circle track racing, Baja, you name it, the LS3 was there. And there were other variants of the LS7, 7-liter engines. The 5.3 became really popular because they were economical and were actually pretty powerful, over 300 horsepower. The 6-liter engine became kind of a jack of all trades. Guys were modding them to over 400 horsepower with the iron block. They were pretty much indestructible. So the LS engines were extremely popular and still are today. The downside of the LS engines today is availability. GM end-of-life most of those engines 4 or 5 years ago. But with the introduction of the LT engine in around 2014, GM took the Gen 4 LS and stepped it up several notches. They bumped the compression way up, 11 to 1 and higher. And that gives you the potential energy of these engines, including the 5.3, because remember, an 11 to 1 5.3 is nothing to sneeze at. Even the LS3 was only in the 10s, along with the Hemis, like the 6.4 Hemi. So we got a 5.3 at 11 to 1, and a 6.2 LT1 and L86 at 11.5 to 1. So that's going to set the new standard in engine performance. The question is, how do you control all that compression? Well, GM added continuous variable valve timing, direct injection, dual-stage oil pumps, and to keep the efficiency up, multiple displacement technology. So what you end up having is an engine that drives as mild as a stock V6 with a tremendous amount of power. You wouldn't want to put an LS 5.3 6-speed in a really heavy JK and tow a trailer with it at a high altitude with 37 to 40-inch tires. Yes, it will do it, just like the V6 will do it, but it's going to downshift, and it's just not going to have the performance of the 6.2 LS or the 5.3 LT. And this is the big news with the LT 5.3. You can get a 5.3 liter engine that'll run at 80 to 90 miles an hour all day long and not sweat going up the hills. Now don't get me wrong, if you got 43-inch tires and you're towing a trailer and you're in Colorado at 10,000 feet, pretty much anything is going to struggle. But I'm just talking comparatively to the earlier generation engines, and that could be a 5.7 Hemi or a 5.3 LS. You're going to see that this little LT really performs, and you're not giving up much. The drivability is excellent. The fuel economy is pretty much second to none in my opinion. You can run the regular gas as we discussed, but it is important that you run the high geared transmission. You can run the 8-speed or the 10-speed, but because this is a smaller displacement engine, having more gears helps it perform at its best. So in the JK I'm driving right now, it's not even breaking a sweat holding 80 miles an hour in these rolling hills at 4,000 to 6,000 feet. I did average almost 18 miles to the gallon on the way up. It was like 17.8, but I did go through a windstorm and rainstorm and thunderstorm. I would say 17 to 18 is where this thing is going to be. If you drive a little less aggressively, you slow down a little bit, and you put some miles on it, and that's important because the adaptives in these need to learn. I literally drove it out of the shop and got it on the highway, but there's spark adaptives and fuel adaptives that need to learn, and once the motor loosens up a little bit, and I do believe this is a new crate engine, you're going to see that mileage even get better. I would say when all that happens on a good day, you're going to see 18, 19 miles to the gallon. If you really drive it like a baby carriage, you might break 20 miles to the gallon. And that's saying a heck of a lot for a V8 Jeep. Now don't expect that with 37-inch tires and full skids and armor and all the lights you have hanging off of it. but do expect somewhere in the low to mid-teens driving it normally. And while some of you say, oh, I want 30 miles to the gallon, the reality is most of these pimped out V8s are lucky if they get 9 to 12. So there is nothing glamorous about this LT 5.3. It's a solid engine. It performs better than you think it does. Combine it with a 10-speed transmission, and in my opinion, that's the engine JKs should have. Now, of course, you can go to the LT 6.2, you can go to a supercharged engine, you can go to whatever you want, but the LT 5.3 is going to get the job done, and it's going to get it done more economically than those other options. Unfortunately, in today's world of $5 to $6 a gallon for gas, costs of everything have gone up, including these engines. A couple of years ago, we used to pick up the L83s for a song. Not anymore. We're using the L82s now, which is almost identical to the L83, but there's been so many GM plant closures, and with COVID and everything else, you're going to be spending in the mid to high 20s now on an LT 5.3, which is still a phenomenal bargain. And some of you might say, well, that's not that far off from an LT1, and it's not. If you're in the high 20s for a 5.3 and you're in the low 30s for an LT1, a lot of you might say, well, I'm just going to go for the LT1, and you can do that. But for my use, the LT 5.3 gets the job done. It can run on regular gas. It does cost less money. And if you consider the longevity of this motor, it really is a good value. This is an early JK, pretty much like most of you have. This JK is pretty stock. It's a Rubicon, very similar to my 09 when I first got it. And I can tell you, I drove this same highway with my 09 when I first got it with a 3.8, and it was pure misery. Trying to hold 75 miles an hour on these hills, let alone 80, was a challenge. And even if I could hold the higher speeds, it was so uncomfortable listening to that motor scream. And to be fair, a lot of the problem was the transmission. The 42 RLE was not the king of efficiency when it came to transmissions. It really was old technology. But now driving this LT 5.3, which is only 1.5 liters bigger than that 3.8, it's a dream. I can cruise 89, I can cruise at any speed I want. And getting over 17 miles to the gallon isn't going to break the bank. Yeah, of course, at $5.30 a gallon, it's still going to hurt, but that's a lot better than 9 to 10 miles to the gallon. We're going to take this JK to the mountain, and we're going to see you soon.